Okay, I've been working like 3 jobs. Probably why I never see you.
All right, also welcome back to the Building a Fighter podcast. My name is Dr. Austin Schoen, sports chiropractor, strength coach, wrestling coach. Y'all know me. But today I have a guest on. His name is Forrest Smith. I'm excited about this one. He is one of the leaders in everything red light right now. He's an owner and I believe CEO, correct?
That's correct.
CEO of a company called Kineon?
That's right.
Love it. All of the pronunciations are correct. But it's a device that I've seen recently. You guys, whoever's your marketing team is fantastic because I get targeted ads from you guys all the time. But it's something I've wanted to dive into, and it's a device that I'm excited to try. I actually have. I just kind of joined the partner program through the clinician side, and then I just bought another one for myself. So I'm excited to see it, but I want to learn more about it, and here we are. So Forrest, take it away. Where are you from? Who are you, and how'd you get into red light?
So I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia. Kind of grew up playing a ton of sports and really, just played at a competitive level with a number of different things. I actually wrestled as well, although I have to kind of give that a caveat that it's a hard thing to say if Georgia's not the wrestling capital that kind of say the Midwest is. And so we go on these traveling things and just get demolished by guys who are from a wrestling background there because they seem to start at about the fetus age, which is makes them much more effective. But
6 years old, dude.
But yeah. So I am 45 years old this year. I've been building hardware companies. I lived in China for almost 20 years, building innovative hardware companies and kind of the manufacturing and supply chain for those, and then selling them, once they got big enough for larger companies to take an interest. And this company is a little bit different because we essentially started, my partner Tom and I actually met really around the mission. And we spent kind of our first, before we even started looking at what kind of technology or what's gonna meet that mission, we spent 2 months kind of talking about how can we do something that's not going to be, building a company for exit is great, and it's not a bad thing to kind of start a startup with that kind of trajectory. But what we wanted to do, and what we really connected about kind of fundamentally, was we want to do something where we are accountable, but where the outcomes really are for the people that we're engaging with, our users, our staff, really anybody we interact with, is improving their life by having come into contact with us. And so what that came down to in the end was defining it as the mission as increasing the quality of life for the largest number of people we can in the most measurable way we can. And the technology came kind of as an adjunct to that. I think one of the things that I've always been doing as a technologist is kind of playing with different technologies off the side of my desk, and I spend a ton of time in the medical literature around this. And it's a really counterintuitive thing to kind of find that you can shine light on your body and somehow trigger, meaningful changes from a health and wellness standpoint. And so when we kind of had that technology come across our desk, we dove into it with the idea that we could debunk this, and that this has got to be some kind of nonsense because it just sounds really counterintuitive. But what we found from the medical literature is that, right now, I think it's up over 7,000 clinical trials and research studies and meta-analyses, et cetera, that really show that when you nail the dosing correctly for photobiomodulation, that you can trigger a number of really powerful changes in your body. And so happy to dive in on those. We like our rabbit holes and running down these and kind of getting into the physiology side of things as well.
Well, so, I agree with you. Like when I was going through chiro school, it was one of those things I'm like, there's no way light can help people. That doesn't make any fucking sense. And then here we are, and every piece of literature that I've read recently shows that this stuff works. And that's really why I wanted to get into it. And in clinic, we have a class 4 laser, we use it, and we have red light panels as well. But I really am interested in the Kineon and the Move Plus because of the proximity to the skin, as well as the NIR plus the red light, and the different wavelengths that you have access to. But let's dive deep. Let's start with our first deep dive. What exactly is the red light and the NIR, and can you describe what NIR is, and what does it do for people?
Absolutely. So we've spent tens of thousands of hours as a team kind of researching what what are these photoacceptors? So you have molecules in different parts of your body that accept photons and change some level of the signaling that they kind of trigger downstream. And so there's a number of these photoacceptors. But I think, one of the things that we noticed coming into the space was that there were some very good dosing devices out there on the market from a clinical level. But one of the issues with that is that you'd really love to see people using this on a daily basis. So they can come in and get it like the really powerful and nice kind of dosing from a laser standpoint to penetrate through to that internal tissue. When they have a chance, whenever they're coming into the clinic, they're going to get a good kind of class 3, class 4 device for treating that internal tissue. The downside for that is that most people aren't going to be in the clinic that often, and they'd love to have something where they could replace, things that they're currently using from a pharmaceutical standpoint to reduce inflammation and pain. And so our goal with our device was to take essentially $30,000 to $50,000 devices and still be able to include the lasers and be able to kind of minimize the size of them, minimize the cost of them enough to where people could use these at home so that they're able to make these impacts on their physiology from a day-to-day standpoint. And but sorry, go ahead. I'll keep.
No, you're good, dude. I was just saying it. 100%. I'm just saying, heck yeah. Like, I love it because that is one of the main things, right? I'm an all cash pay clinic. It's expensive to come see me and expensive to use the red light. And I feasibly for almost the entire population in America, like, you're not going to be able to come see me every day. It's just not possible. Unless you're rolling with Elon money. So like for the most part, like, there needs to be something to fill in the in between. And if red light is this thing that you and I both think it does, then how is there, there is now, but how wasn't there something to fill in the gaps in between, which is what it seems like the Move Plus does really well.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And one of the things that we've kicked off recently is we've had a number of people kind of in a similar space to where you are as athletes, but as clinicians as well, kind of reach out and say, how do we partner together so that we can kind of help people fill those gaps between the sessions in clinic and get better outcomes longer term because of that. And it's very exciting because, one of the things that we kind of get stuck in the back end of kind of product development and industrial design and electrical engineering, but it's so exciting to work with medical professionals like yourself, where you're on the front line. You get to see the changes that this makes in people's lives on a daily basis. And it's just so exciting to be able to kind of be in that. And we try to keep that feedback loop short to where we can kind of say, how else can we be a better partner? How can we make a better device? Because aside from reducing the cost of the device, we also want to reduce the friction points for people to use it. And so, how do we make it wearable so they can do things while they're treating themselves, so they can build a habit stacking kind of protocol that they can do on a daily basis? How do we make this travel friendly? So we went through additional steps to kind of clear the FCC so that the guys in security from the Homeland Security don't give you a hard time going through.
Yeah, they don't just think it's a bomb.
And they actually, when we were starting to develop the betas of these, they would definitely pull us up and take these off of us every time we were going through this. And so again, we work with a number of different kind of strength and conditioning coaches and professional professional sports teams who are like, I can't get my guys in under the bed or under the class 3 or class 4 devices as much as I want. But if you guys can make this travel friendly, I'll put it on everybody on the flights. And we've just seen amazing results by kind of continuing to work as hard as we can to reduce those friction points for using it.
Yeah. So talking about the hardware side of things, I know that is mostly your background, correct? How do you, I actually have talked to some colleagues about this interview, and one of the questions that two of them had asked is, how do you quality control for the Move Plus? And how do you know that you're hitting, I believe it's, 660 and 808 is your wavelengths? How do you know that you're hitting that with every device? Is there a testing protocol through each batch? Like, how do we know that we're getting exactly what we're looking for?
So we have testing coming into our factory for the emitters. So we use infrared lasers, and we use LEDs for the red because the red doesn't penetrate as much just naturally. But we've spent a lot of time kind of building out really powerful mathematical models showing where these different photoacceptors exist in the levels of tissue, and then how do we distribute these photons through those as effectively as possible. And so what's come out of that is infrared lasers come into the factory, and we test them coming in, and the red LEDs come in and we test them coming in. And then once they're loaded onto the boards and built into the products, we have another test that kind of profiles both of them. And so it is important to be as exact and as kind of critical as we can about these. We found that from the literature, these are the two most effective to date, kind of most effective and broadly researched wavelengths that we also test with our beta products as well. And one of the unfortunate things about treating pain is that there's not really an objective measurement for this, and it's annoying as a kind of as a technologist and as someone who'd like to hold ourselves as objectively accountable as possible according to our mission. But I think what we've found though is that with pain, all the gold standard kind of measurements are relative, and so what it comes down to is things like the visual assessment score, where you're kind of taking a 0 to 10 approach, or kind of a very frowny face to a very happy face approach for kind of scaling these things. We are seeing with those measurements, even though they're relative, that they're very, very powerful outcomes that we can impact with the technology. And so we try to continue to dial in our dosing models and make sure that we're baselining those and kind of pulling. It's nice to have mathematical models, but if they're completely mathematical and you're not testing them in the real world, then it's kind of ivory tower, like, okay, this is probably working. So we try to test as much as we can in the real world as well.
Right. And I mean, dude, as a clinician, I understand like subjective outcomes are one of the hardest thing to deal with, because like the biggest conversation I have with people is damage and pain aren't the same.
Yes.
It's like, if there's a difference between, hey, this tissue is damaged, but then you could be 5 months out of an injury. We know that physiologic healing time is already gone. We know the tissue is healed, but you're still feeling this pain symptom. Like, why is that? And that's always, as a clinician, one of the hardest conversations to have with somebody stuck in a chronic pain setting. But talking about like, let's dive into those specific wavelengths that you guys use. So can you talk to us a little bit about, like, from the 660 and the 808, what are both of those trying to target, and what symptomatic response or what physiologic response are we trying to get with both of those?
So with the 808, we're targeting a couple of different things, but they're typically more kind of internal tissue. And so just to kind of, the high level version of this is the red light, and we actually do kind of condense the red light down with a primary optic from the standard emission pattern of 120 degrees angle, the kind of breadth down to 30 degrees, because we do get a better kind of outcome for that. But typically for the red, it's going to penetrate a little bit less, so it's going to be more superficial tissue. It's going to help with things like blood flow. So you see this, and as an example of one of the kind of triggering mechanisms for that, both the red and the infrared, but the infrared more internally and kind of the red more superficially, trigger release of nitric oxide or kind of dissociation of nitric oxide from hemoglobin. And so you've got a ton of hemoglobin in your body. It's kind of one of our primary carrier molecules in our blood. But there's 4 binding sites that are competitive on hemoglobin for oxygen and nitric oxide. And so 2 things happen when you do this. One is when you can release the nitric oxide from these binding sites, those binding sites are now available to bind more oxygen and deliver more oxygen to the area. But one of the other things that you see is the nitric oxide going into the blood also is a dilating factor. And so you're able to deliver more oxygen, but you're also able to deliver more hemoglobin to the area, because your cardiovascular endothelial tissue actually, it's both short-term and long-term benefits. One is you open it up from a dilation factor standpoint, but 2 is that you actually train that cardiovascular endothelial tissue to be able to, oftentimes what you'll see with kind of traumatic tissue damage is that inflammation and chronic inflammation around those injuries will limit the amount of blood flow in the area. And so you see these kind of cold pools of tissue around muscle tears and ankle sprains. And I had an ACL surgery. People don't really think about the surgery and the kind of the intervention side of things as triggering kind of soft tissue damage and ongoing chronic inflammation and just traumatic tissue damage in your body, but they really do, and it kind of limits the amount of blood flow to the area. So with that said, again, both of these kind of wavelengths really interact effectively with hemoglobin to be able to increase that blood flow, increase oxygen delivery. And some of the things that we see also in this space is increasing the growth hormones. So really kind of triggering a faster healing for soft tissue. So increased type 2 collagen production, increased stem cell proliferation, and selection of that stem cell to be, so if you have an injured knee, one of the things that's been very interesting about this is that the stem cells will self-select into, these mesenchymal stem cells will self-select into a different type of cell, but they'll choose to be fast-growing cartilage or soft tissue cells like chondroblasts at a much higher rate. So you actually increase the rate of regeneration for your soft tissue. And there's a number of different impacts for, again, with that type 2 collagen available at a higher rate, you get better looking scar tissue, more flexible, less kind of stiff scar tissue longer term, and reduced inflammation. That's a lot of mouthfuls there, and I'm happy to jump into any one of those to kind of give a little bit more flavor to it. But it's just so exciting to see because what we've seen in the past is people kind of being prescribed anti-inflammatories, so non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs or opioids. And it's both of those have really powerfully negative effects on the cardiovascular endothelial tissue. They've even been shown with the NSAIDs to be able to increase the rate of degradation of your soft tissue. So if you're kind of taking ibuprofen for a kind of osteoarthritis, for example, in the knee, you feel like this is getting better, but what it's doing is taking the batteries out of that smoke detector while the fire is still raging in the kitchen versus actually kind of going to put out the fire. And so it's a little bit kind of, I think, undereducated. We find a lot of people who said, we've been advised to use NSAIDs chronically, just ongoing, and haven't really been advised of the downsides of that or the risks of that. And it's one of the things we're out here beating the drum about quite a bit as well.
Well, it's every athlete ever.
Yes.
Oh yeah. I'm sore. I'm going to pop 3 ibuprofen. I'm going to pop 3 Advil. And like I did it I literally from high school through college, and knowing what I know now, the worst thing I could have done outside of the whole outside of the stomach ulcer thing, like it's actually degrading our tissue as we go. But it's interesting because that's the same analogy I use. So a lot of combat sports athletes, their injuries are actually spinal. So there's something called extremity pain of a spinal source. A lot of nerve radiation, a lot of disc issues, stuff like that, because of the positions we get in through combat sports. And exactly what you said about ibuprofen is exactly how I describe our extremity pain of a spinal source. Like your hamstring gets tight, right? But we know most likely if it's, I believe the numbers anyway, I think it's between 70 to 80% of athletes that actually have like hip pain, it's really coming from your back. Yes. So if we try to stretch the hamstring away and it's a disc issue, it's going to make it worse.
Yes.
We're taking the batteries out without figuring out where the smoke's coming from.
Yes, that's exactly it.
I love that analogy because that's what I have to deal with on a day-to-day basis with combat athletes, because everybody wants to stretch their hamstrings when they're tight, but hey, why don't we take this as a next clinical step deeper? Why are the hamstrings getting tight in the first place? Muscles don't just get tight out of nowhere, just like tissue doesn't just start not getting oxygen to it out of nowhere. There's typically a metabolic cause. There's an issue going on in the body that if you take it literally just one level of clinical reasoning deeper, you figure out what's going on. And you start to figure out how do I help that person? Yeah.
I love this.
So
so exciting to hear people talking about metabolic causes for physical issues. We're spending time on a grant right now for one of our products that's coming out next year. That's a transcranial device, and
I want to get into that because I saw that on the marketing call, because concussions are, as you can imagine, combat sports, concussions.
Yes.
And that's actually, so that's how my background is. That's how my career ended, was I had 9 major concussions, and that's what stopped me from wrestling at the end. But that's one of the things I get into right now with my fighters, because as you can imagine, it's a car crash every time you're in a fight. Like whether it's a major concussion or a minor concussion, you got some brain trauma every time. What is this transcranial device, and what exactly is the targeting aspect of it? Is it red light? Is it electrical stimulation? Like what exactly is the goal of it?
So the goal is to, so our first product will be therapeutic only for the brain. And the second will be inclusive of essentially imaging. So spectroscopy with the focus on being able to measure metabolic function by a couple of different kind of measurements. One is cerebral blood flow. So in your brain, you can measure by essentially shooting lasers into your head. They reflect back differently when there's
Star Wars shit.
Yes, it's so crazy. and like the fact that we had to talk about that on the air like this is just awesome. But yeah, so we you shoot in. So there's so to start with the first one, it's going to be primarily infrared. There will be 3 different wavelengths of infrared. So 808, which is in our current device, but also 940 and 1064, which have been more recently kind of researched transcranial wavelengths and have shown very, very positive impacts from a kind of transcranial and deeper tissue stimulation standpoint. We're
Pause. So that's the same wavelength that goes into, so we have a K laser. I believe that's the same wavelength that takes it the next level up on our K lasers. I believe it's 910. It's the same, correct?
Yes. Yes. It is.
Okay, gotcha.
So like in the low 900s, these are things that have been researched more effectively really over the last 5 years. And based on that research, we've kind of loaded them into our photon delivery mathematical models, and we're seeing really powerful improvements in what we can dose for kind of particularly for brain tissue. You have, in my case, a very thick skull in between the emitter and the actual brain tissue. And, that does, you'd like to have a higher percentage of that, those photons delivered so that we can still keep it a relatively low total power output and avoid thermal issues and things like this. But yeah, it's super exciting because the impacts that when you start adding these kind of different wavelengths, you're going to different depths of tissue and you're triggering a number of different photoacceptors and different signaling processes. But one of the things that's been most powerful about this is that, and the reason why we want to include the kind of sensor technology longer term is we'd like to be able to measure this metabolic, there's a spectrum of metabolic dysfunction to metabolic function, or metabolic impairment to metabolic function. And when you're able to kind of diagnose or measure the metabolic dysfunction in different areas of the brain, it maps extremely highly, correlates extremely highly back to different pathologies. So
so that'd probably be really good for, what is it? Is it Alzheimer's?
That's
or that's like diabetes type 3 is what they're calling
that's
it
right.
now?
That's exactly it. And I love hearing that you're like on that diabetes type 3 thing as well, because for a long time we've been looking at this from a medical research standpoint as more kind of these plaques and proteins that are building up. And so the pharmaceutical companies that have been attacking the space or researching the space have really been trying to treat something that's a high correlation relative to these outcomes versus actually the fundamental mechanisms that impart it. And we've taken something that has been more recent in the literature from an approach, which is this microvasculature hypothesis, which is even more highly correlated than these tau proteins and this kind of waste material that can build up in your brain with ongoing performance deficits. So cognitive issues that people have ongoing from, and with combat sports, it's TBI combat sports. But oddly enough, it's not just the concussion. So like we're seeing this with special forces, where guys are going and not like, so some special forces, they're strapping C4 to a door and they're getting kind of concussive blasts from that. But a lot of times they'll also just go shoot a sidearm at the range for a couple hundred rounds. And even these small kind of micro concussive blasts are having a big impact on what we're seeing from a microvasculature performance standpoint, and long-term can trend people towards things like CTE, dementia, and Alzheimer's. And the science is still early on this, but from what we've seen, the data is fairly clear that this microvascular hypothesis is very likely to be confirmed with upcoming research. And one thing that's very powerful about the laser therapy is when you're triggering kind of nitric oxide release in the area, when you're triggering these kind of oxidative stress balancing effects versus allowing people's brains to go into kind of a more kind of stressed state, the outcomes for this longer term are massive and additive over time. And so, for us, it's important to be able to provide those outcomes. So we're going to deliver a therapeutic device for this, but it's also important to be able to measure these outcomes, because that's really our mission as a company, is to be able to say, here's kind of your tissue before, during, short-term, middle-term, long-term use of these therapeutic kind of interventions. But also if you want to change your diet, if you want to stop drinking alcohol, if you want to get better sleep, if you want, like, there's a number of different things that you can stack. We're kind of providing one more tool for these effective stacks. And then longer term, this kind of measurement tool to say, well, it looked like, this transcranial laser therapy plus getting an extra hour of sleep of night has really impacted positively your microvasculature and your brain. And longer term, you're going to see this and this and this outcome improve cognitively because of that.
Okay. And then, so bringing it back to the Move Plus, we've been talking about objective measures. Is there any that you trust? Like, I know you could do a Whoop, you can do an Aura, you can do like all the fun stuff, right? Like I have a Google Watch, a little Fitbit. Most of my athletes have Polar. Is there any ones that you trust more than others, or any ones that you like, or how do you track objective measures from the red light that you're currently using with the Move Plus?
So I use Whoop. Oh, sorry, wrong wrist. I use Whoop, and I do Polar because the Whoop for HRV stuff while I'm training things like this is the Polar is just very, very effective. They've got they've been there kind of the gold standard in that space for some time. So I use that with my training to kind of stay in sometimes it's sprints and just getting it up and doing interval training, and sometimes it's zone 2 where you got to keep it down and kind of having a good read on that is really kind of a powerful impact as a toolkit. As an aside, one of the things we're also working on that we'll be releasing in April of next year is a vagus nerve stimulation device inclusive of EEG sensing. And so one of the things that we see with a lot of combat athletes, but also just high intensity athletes, is that your kind of the one of the bottlenecks for them from a training load standpoint is that central nervous system overload that you can get into when you're trying to increase your load from a training standpoint too quickly, and so that can trigger a number of things. One is injuries and kind of poor outcomes from a training standpoint with the muscular side. But the second is also you just sleep more poorly, you recover more ineffectively or inefficiently, and so being able to track your central nervous system signaling through your vagus nerve, we feel is a really powerful way to say, and then stimulate that vagus nerve in a way that's going to kind of get you out of central nervous system overload and kind of a fight or flight kind of autonomic status that can trigger. Allows people to kind of increase their load and training kind of total workload without having that risk. And when they do trigger something from a central nervous system overload, they have a tool to be able to kind of pull that back into a better recovery state from an autonomic standpoint.
For sure. And I'd be interested to so most of my athletes, I'm very similar to you, right? That's, I think, the hidden cause of a lot of, whether it's overtraining, whether it's whatever, you get stuck in fight or flight, you can't recover. Yeah. We know that if you're stuck in fight or flight, you can't sleep. That delays recovery. It also forces you to just be stressed all the time, increase cortisol levels, all the fun shit that happens, right? I'd be interested to throw that on somebody and have them like diaphragmatically breathe.
Yes.
Because that's currently what we do with a lot of our athletes. Is after a session, my rule is you should leave at the same heart rate you walk in at.
Yes.
And if not less, yes. Right? But if you leave and you're still ramped up, we know that you're not stimulating that recovery cascade, and you're not honestly ready to leave.
Oh, that's awesome. I love it.
I'd be interested to see that with diaphragmatic breathing and like using that as an objective measure for, or having some sort of objective measure for increasing recovery modalities. That would be cool.
100%.
That'd be a cool study to do.
Yeah, we'll be doing this with those EEGs on the vagus nerve, but also with HRV data, and then kind of pairing it back against that. We're working to also include, and it's going to take some doing, so we're not 100% sure we can deliver this yet, but to include respiratory data in there as well, because we feel like there's going to be a kind of some signals out of that will be meaningful for us in interpreting how we can get people back down, and then kind of modulating the stimulation for the vagus nerve in real time in a way that's kind of personalized and is going to get the best results for people. Again, that's still in development. It's we have aggressive goals for it, but it may be something we roll out over time. But I think you're 100% right. Like this is really something where you've taken an awesome approach to it, because that's how people can like either work themselves into or work themselves out of injuries and also just mental health wise. Like when your central nervous system is overloaded, that autonomic stress that you have can trigger. There's a number of different ways from a medical standpoint that we've seen it measured. One is time to sleep. So and a lot of athletes kind of from a just from an interaction standpoint, if you kind of run that by them, like, hey, has this been interrupting your sleep, or how long does it take you to get to sleep every night? We've seen with some early testing on this that you can take time to sleep from 2 hours, where people have ruminative thoughts and are really not getting into a restful state as quickly as they would like, down to 5 minutes with one treatment. And so that's a pretty cool, yeah. It's just, again, I can't wait to have these on and start being able to use it as well, because I think you can kind of, when you know that you have tools to kind of level yourself back out, and you can kind of push yourself to those limits a little bit more, it makes it, you're just more comfortable going out and kind of getting after it in a really aggressive way from both an intensity and workload standpoint. And so that's what we're shooting for. And again, there's applications for that where, it's not necessarily just athletes. So you or I might want to go train and push ourselves really hard, and then use this to kind of dial it back down so you can still recover. But in a lot of cases, what we're finding is people have, office politics that they have these ruminative thoughts about. They have these things where they're not necessarily just kind of in a fight or flight state from a physiological trigger standpoint. This is something where they're kind of, the psychological and health and wellness side of things is actually something that can trigger this as well. And so I think it's going to have a really broad application for so many people with breathing, kind of being able to, they operate on two different systems. And so synergistically, you can get even better outcomes from this. So it's super exciting space to be in.
Dude, it's for those people that, ever meet those people that plan their arguments ahead of time? Like they're planning for the argument. Like this is perfect for them, where they can just turn those thoughts, just sleep, go to sleep. Stop planning your 7 arguments that you're going to have tomorrow.
Yes. Or just responding to yesterday's argument in the shower.
Yeah, exactly.
I should have said this.
Like thinking about what way to talk to your boss so that you can tell them to fuck off without actually telling them to fuck off.
That's exactly it. And again, what we're trying to trigger for people is just give them the tools. This doesn't have to solve all your problems, but I love the fact that you nailed the breathing. We've been actually experimenting, and we'll be building in a breathing piece into our app, because one of the things that we feel like is when you have these tools, what we're really trying to provide with our sensor-based products coming forward is a windshield, right? So now you have sometimes when if you're driving a car, if you don't have a windshield, you can't see where you're going. And we feel like a lot of times when you're kind of, I feel maybe I'm a little bit off today, or I didn't rest very well, it's not easy to steer the car. And so when you have these pieces where you can say, I really need to get back into my breathing, that's what's moving the needle for me, or use this vagus nerve stimulation, that's what's moving the needle for me from a rest and recover standpoint. When you have that measurability, when you have that kind of key measurement piece that you can take and say, oh man, I am way outside of where I should be today, you just feel more confident in being able to drive the car faster. And so that's again, we're excited about it, both from our performance standpoint and from just anyone who's ever had that kind of time to sleep very long, or their recovery down, or again, those ruminative thoughts are a really powerful tell as well.
Yeah, every CEO ever.
With this, it never stops.
No, never. Dude, I get it. So outside of that, let's move forward a little bit so let's talk about, I guess, the biggest thing you can get from red light from a local tissue standpoint, but then are there any systemic benefits that you can get as well that cause it through the entire body? And then another question, not to go too far, but I like to let you talk. Talk to me about the difference between like a Kineon the Move Plus and then like a red light panel. Because a lot of people have access to both. Like a lot of people want to know, is one better or worse, or what can I get from one or the other?
Absolutely. So, all right. So the first question was, sorry, I wanted to address those in order. Panel was the second. What was the first one?
Benefits locally and systemically. Like we already talked about the nitrogen oxide and everything, but I know there is some systemic benefits as well.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we've been playing with is we're working with a lab out of Japan that's developed this proximal priority therapy, which essentially they're using. They wanted to see how extensively they could test the kind of what they call remote photobiomodulation, or general systemic impacts versus kind of local impacts. And it's a great example of this. But one of the things that kind of flagged them for us as a group we'd like to work with longer term in understanding more about this, is they had a study on this remote photobiomodulation treatment. And essentially they're treating two large bloodways in your neck, and then the base of your skull, treating up towards kind of, if you can imagine kind of a unicorn horn is where you want to kind of treat towards from a targeting standpoint. And I've been playing with this as well based on what they've done. But the study they had that really kind of triggered our research team on this was they had 229 women, I believe, in Japan who had been infertile for at least 5 years, come in and use this therapy as part of their fertility kind of process or protocols. And these women had essentially given up on having kids because of the infertility. And within 8 months, something like, I believe it was 28% of them were pregnant, and 22% carried that through to a full-term healthy pregnancy. And so, that kind of impact is crazy. How do you treat your neck and then see this kind of impact from a fertility standpoint externally? So one of the things that they've been digging into is kind of explaining some of the mechanisms as to how that works. And when you're treating your neck and your brain, there's a couple of different things that you're expecting out of this. One is you're getting a huge level of blood flow through these areas in your neck. It's the largest, some of the largest kind of blood vessels in your body. And so that impact of the nitric oxide released, goes throughout the body. And so there's a really powerful impact for reduction of inflammation. There's a powerful positive impact on what they call shear strength of the kind of cardiovascular and endothelial tissue. But just generally, one of the things that they see for this is that not yours, but one's kind of uterine lining and ovarian tissue is very, very impacted by inflammation. And so when you can reduce the impacts of that inflammation and modulate the impacts on the actual brain from this overinflamed uterine or ovarian tissue, you see really positive outcomes from a fertility standpoint. And so there's a ton of kind of research to be done still in this space. But there is, that's one good example of remote photobiomodulation making a systemic impact and improving endothelial tissue, not just on the cardiovascular side, but also in kind of that female fertility tissue as well. And one other example. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I just quick question, because my wife's pregnant. Is it all safe to use while pregnant?
Yes, it is.
Okay, heck yeah.
Yes, it's again one of the things we're releasing next year, having found this. So our research and technology teams are leaning really heavily male. And I think that's not an uncommon thing. But one of the things that we've noticed about this in kind of working with our community of users is that people were finding really powerful impacts for endometriosis is what triggered us in the first place to research further into this space. And when they have this, that can affect fertility. It also can, like, one of the things that it triggers is also just people not being able to function because they're in a really high level of pain and discomfort for this. And there's not really a good pharmaceutical solution for this. And again, this started with just, a couple of our users saying, hey, my wife used this for endometriosis and went from like an 8 out of 10 on pain to like a 0 or 1 out of 10 on pain within 30 minutes. Have you guys looked at this? And so we kind of put it in the, hey, this is something we should research, until we got up to about 20 people saying the same thing. And what we found was that, very similar to like a lot of the medical community, we leaned heavily male. We were focused on things like, muscle recovery, brain tissue, joint recovery and things like this. And we had completely missed the fact that, so there's a higher level of mitochondrial density in ovarian and uterine tissue. And the level of inflammation that women experience on a monthly basis is orders of magnitude higher than basically anything else in a human experience. And so, like, it's everything that we treat. We treat inflammation. We interact with mitochondria very effectively. And so, like, why has nobody done this yet? And so we started kind of playing around with different protocols that we could use for this. And so, long story short, we're going to be bringing out a kind of femtech product next year that's going to help people with monthly menstrual pain, with endometriosis, and with fertility. And it's just it's kind of crazy that no one's done this yet. Essentially every event that I go to, somebody pulls me aside to ask about, hey, can I use this on my junk? But like, no one's brought this forward for female pathologies, and it's unfortunate, but it's our team are super excited to be able to get in and make a difference there.
Well, it's wild too, because in America, like the top consumer class is female.
Yes.
It's not male.
Yes.
So it doesn't make sense that everything we do is targeted towards males.
It's crazy.
When the people
Even the
that
research,
according to every piece of research, the females are the one buying the stuff.
Yeah. And I don't know how this has been missed, but again, we kind of looked in, just having been kind of like, how has nobody done this yet? We looked into the amount of research going towards female fertility versus male erectile dysfunction. And it's like 1,000 times higher for erectile dysfunction than it is for female fertility.
Yeah,
there's
a new dick pill every week.
Yeah. And apparently it's just such a widespread thing that, again, there's just everybody and their mother has been asking about, like, hey, can I use this for kind of male sexual performance versus like, we haven't seen that level of engagement out of female users. But again, it's great that we're kind of in contact ongoing with our community so well that people were just sending in their stories of what they were using it for. And so we kind of cataloged those just from a research standpoint. And after a year and a half of shipping products, we had so many of these from an endometriosis standpoint. I was like, we've only seen a couple of studies in the literature about that. And so we started putting together our own and it's kind of taken off since there.
Heck yeah, man. And then moving on to the second part of everything, panels versus the Move Plus. What is the difference? What are we getting from one versus the other? Like, why would you use the Move Plus over just a 4? We have Jack Cruz's 4 panels in the clinic. Like, why would you use one versus the other?
So just from a dosing standpoint, emitting light at the surface does a couple of things. One, it makes it more consistent from a delivery standpoint to the internal tissue, and two, this is kind of a weird one, but when you compress skin, you can see it blanch, is what they call it in the medical literature. And so it's essentially a lot of the hemoglobin moving out of the area that would otherwise kind of accept these photons so that you can actually dose towards internal tissue. So essentially, so 2 things from a delivery standpoint, penetration, better consistency. The other thing is, LEDs emit in which is, I have never seen a laser panel yet, although somebody might be working on that.
Yeah, fair. Yeah.
The LEDs emit in a 120-degree pattern, and that's extremely difficult to model how you're going. So to take a step back, I said, why would we want to model like how these photons are delivered? The outcomes that you get from a light therapy kind of session are what they call biphasic. So there's a biphasic dose curve. So you keep getting, as you dose more, you keep getting better and better and better outcomes until you jump the shark, and then it goes worse and worse and worse. And it doesn't really go back below 0, so you're not going to be damaging anything unless you have above a certain power laser, and those aren't really available to the public. So with that said, what we'd like to do is have the dosing at the very top of that so that you can get the best outcomes. When you're dosing with the panel, if you move 2 inches forward or 2 inches back, you have a wildly different dose. And in these panels, it's almost impossible, even without that kind of movement back and forth, to understand how this light penetrates through effectively. And I think the last piece of it is because there are a couple of devices out there that actually use LEDs, but are also at the skin level. From our modeling, when you can turn up the power of the LEDs enough to be able to treat internal tissue, but when you do that, everything that's more superficial than that goes down to the bottom end of the curve. So basically, we want to treat the tissue as effectively as we can across the board, whether it's superficial or deep. And so we've balanced this to the point where, as an example, on one of our devices here, I have mine packed up, but you can see the modules. On each module, we have 10 lasers. We originally planned on 2 lasers per module. So we originally planned on 2 lasers per module, but now we've got 10. And the reason for that is when we have a single one, we're still overdosing the tissue that's more superficial, relative to what we'd like to see as about. We'd like to kind of as effectively treat every bit of tissue that we're interacting with, and that's how our models are built. And again, with the LEDs, you can turn them all the way up so that you hit like that one bit deeper internally, but then you're overdosing everything else. And so we've found the sweet spot for being able to dose these as effectively as possible with all the tissue we interact with. And so that's kind of a deeper dive in it maybe than is 100% necessary, but
no, but it's true, right? Like when we have the panels, what we tell our athletes when they go in there, and I want to get into when to use it right after this, but like when we tell the athletes, it's like, hey, stand as close as possible. Yeah, that's not an objective measure. Like outside of just having a piece of tape on the ground, but then even that, everybody's body's different. Like that could be a difference between an inch or two, depending on your body. So like it makes sense if you can make it as objective as possible in the delivery of the red light and the delivery of the laser that the Move Plus has. It makes sense that that's going to have a superior byproduct of it or a superior effect.
Yeah, I think that's 100% it. What I would say is that if people are also using if you can find a reasonable kind of order of magnitude dosing for the panels, we do see really good results for things like fibroblasts and kind of the more kind of superficial tissue could actually really benefit from this. And so people using this as an anti-aging type thing has been really effective. And we've seen really kind of good dosing models for that. It's really just kind of the internal tissue that's so much harder to hit if you're not using lasers and if you don't have that full kind of photon delivery model to be able to lean on.
Yeah. And so I know for the athletes that are listening to this podcast, what would be the best time to use this? Because I've read some studies that say like, there's a couple studies, I think it was one out of 2015 that really made me flip on the red light. They were talking about using red light prior to working out for 15 minutes decreases the strength losses that you have all the way through your workout. Like what would you recommend? Are you a before? Are you an after? And the reason why I'm asking is a lot of people that I talk to, they're like, hey, we don't want to take away the inflammation after a workout, right? So we don't want to it's the reason why you don't cold plunge after.
Yeah.
When do you recommend people use it?
So one nice thing about this is that we're talking about a couple of different types of inflammation. And we get this question a lot from our strength and conditioning and kind of performance coaches. And so like, we're working with the U.S. Olympic weightlifting team, and they've got devices and they're using these, and what they're finding is that so you have acute inflammation, which is actually really helpful and helps you kind of rebuild muscle tissue and grow, and hypertrophy and strength gains, and all of this is really highly correlated to this. You also have some less kind of beneficial inflammation that's either types of chronic inflammation or just powerful increases in oxidative stress. And so, again, those oxidative stress pieces and this ongoing chronic inflammation doesn't really help you from a hypertrophy or strength standpoint. So, we've got some really good data on this, though, and I think you mentioned it exactly. There's baseline, there's kind of photobiomodulation, which just triggers a faster increase in recovery, so that you can. One of the things we found with this, for example, with the kind of weightlifters is you can go through a strength gain curve because they have like these cyclic kind of training programs where like being able to cut one day off of the recovery means that you can go back in and train harder, faster. And so, if you're using like that, it's almost kind of similar to like a performance enhancing drug in the fact that you just recover like tissue that much faster.
Right. Like it's like one of the popular things that was, I believe, like 5 years ago was like beetroot and nitric oxide supplements, right? Well, if we know red light causes that NO2 effect, well, then it makes a lot of sense that you're going to get more oxygen to the tissue. You're going to be able to have those strength. You're going to be able to have the nutrients that the blood's going to bring there because it's going to stimulate that blood flow all the way through there, and it's going to open up or vasodilate as it goes. So like to me, why would I take beetroot juice when I can just put that on for 15 minutes before?
And oddly, they actually work synergistically.
Both.
Yeah. So you can actually kind of trigger more nitrates and nitrates. I always forget the difference there, but in your blood with this, and then activate them with the light. So they work synergistically. One other piece that people have actually, from a research standpoint, documented really well is the decrease in some muscle inflammatory markers that actually reduce the amount of kind of changes. So creatine kinase and C-reactive proteins are two common measurements for kind of muscle inflammation. And again, if you're able to reduce those, you don't see the impacts from a hypertrophy standpoint or from a strength standpoint impacted. You can just get back to training faster, and so it helps you go through those kind of strength and growth curves, more quickly.
I love it. Heck yeah. And then you talked a little bit about everything. So we're after workouts, you said that there's multiple different types of inflammation. How do we know that we're not getting rid of, like, is there a certain amount of time we have to wait after working out to throw the red light on so that we don't start just getting rid of the acute inflammation that is going to benefit us? Or what does that look like?
No, it actually just works directly.
You're just good to go?
Yeah, you're just good to go. If so, one of the things that we do is for this is so from a timing standpoint, you can do it both before and after. Before, two of the things that I've tracked personally on this and seen good outcomes, and it also is supported by the literature, is increased endurance. So the cardiopulmonary performance over time. If you're a rower, I think most of the research is actually around rowers and cyclists, just because of they're very kind of mature.
Makes sense. They're always the ones that are studied.
They get all the cool
because
stuff.
it's so you're so well, and it's so easy to like limit variables.
Yes,
like you're doing one thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
And runners, I would say, right behind that. But yeah, most of the data that I've seen is about kind of these cyclic kind of endurance training modalities, and you see better performance from a cardiopulmonary standpoint for that. So you have better kind of endurance, and you just kind of generate more power over X time. And then again, from a recovery standpoint, we see that more from a strength and resistance training standpoint, where you're doing that training to trigger strength and hypertrophy adaptations in the muscles, and you just get through that process faster when you're treating with laser therapy. So that's the kind of before is like, hey, if you're a runner or a cyclist or a rower, definitely try it out. We've actually done how I tried this was, this actually kind of brings back the remote photobiomodulation is I do this proximal cryotherapy treating the neck and base of the skull towards the front. Mm-hmm. And I also treat the gut. And the gut really is at the center of so many different things from a gut-brain standpoint. But it's kind of extending out to gut, brain, liver, gut, brain, skin. That's two of the protocols that I do every morning is while I'm doing my emails and having my coffee is get it on the neck and then get it on the gut. This is very kind of hand wavy, but I haven't been sick since I've been doing this for months, and it's your immune. And again, the literature supports that the immune function is increased. Autoimmune function is people are seeing really powerful impacts for things like multiple sclerosis from an autoimmune disorder standpoint, like asthma, just from treating the gut. And so for me, that's one of my kind of must-haves in the morning is coffee, neck, and gut treatment. And I'll have to start kind of capturing some more data. We have some clinical trials planned around this for next year. But we'd love to be able to pair it with the vagal stimulation, because we see that as kind of synergistic signaling pathways that we can both trigger and see really powerful outcomes from doing that. So we're queuing up some medical trials for that next year as well.
Well, I mean, it makes sense, right? Like most of those are everything you've talked about are inflammatory pathways, right? And if we know that the red light's going to help us with inflammatory pathways, then in theory, granted, I love anecdotes.
Yeah.
And honestly, like my thing is like, hey, like just because the research isn't there yet doesn't mean it doesn't work.
Yes.
Like a lot of people in my field, it's like, we only have to read RCTs and meta-analysis. Yes. And I'm like, those are super important. We do need those because we need to make sure that we're checking ourselves.
Yeah.
But for the most part, guess what? If we have new shit, it hasn't gone through the 5 years it takes to get, whether it's a legitimate RCT or legitimate meta-analysis on all the different testing. So that doesn't mean I'm not going to try it.
Yes, that's right.
Doesn't mean it's not going to work. Like I care, like anecdotes are just, in my mind, anecdotes help my informed practice just as much as the RCTs I read.
I love
that you're doing that. And I want to try it as well, because like, as I get mine, like that's something I'm going to try.
Oh,
like I said, awesome. like for my pregnant wife, like that's what I was asking for her. It's like, well, she's got low back pain. Guess what? Let's throw red light on her low back.
Yes.
Like it's not going to hurt. We know we can laser. Why not throw that on?
Yes, 100%. No, I love it. I think, we kind of think of this as we're all kind of N equals 1. Like even if a study is out there kind of overwhelmingly positive, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's going to work for you. And if a study doesn't exist yet, let's go test. Let's go put objective measurements around this wherever we can. And then where we can't, let's use subjective measurements as consistently kept as possible. And it's powerful. The data ends up kind of steering you in a positive direction, regardless of if the medical literature is caught up or not.
100%. Well, and even for me, right? Like in my clinical practice, 85% of the people I work with are super athletes. Like we're not researching super athletes. Like we're researching the regular person. So like if I do anything in practice or even the strength and conditioning side, like I'm not going to program for a 45-year-old person that's a blue belt in jiu-jitsu the same way I'm programming for a guy that's in the top 5 in the UFC. It just doesn't work like that. And the studies aren't on the guy in the top 5 in the UFC. All the studies are on the 45-year-old blue belt.
That's exactly
so. Then if I only follow the studies, then I can't help that person at the highest level possible.
100%. I love it. We're so, like our team is kind of on this, what we think of as skeptical optimism. Like there's something out there.
That's literally what I do.
That's awesome. Like just test it, try it on yourself. And again, you know, the anecdotals are not necessarily things that you can base yourself on for everything, but when it's been through enough research in these areas from a mechanistic standpoint, now like how else can we apply this in the most functional and meaningful way on people? I got to come see you in real life. This is you're doing awesome stuff over there.
100%, dude. This has been fantastic, and I know we got to wrap up here soon. I have just a few different questions at the end that I ask everybody, but then one last question on the Move Plus, just low hanging fruit. If you had to pick 3 local areas for musculoskeletal complaints, what 3, whether it's injuries or just joints and areas, do you think that this can help the most with?
So ankles, it's insane. We see people sprain their ankles and they're just back in like, you know, where it would be like a high ankle sprain and you're like a month out, like it's down to days. Like, so ankles are really powerful. Knees, hips, shoulders. And those are, I would say from a joint standpoint, one thing that we do see a lot is people with kind of golf or tennis elbow using the device. And I would say roughly, we keep data on it, but you know, for a hand wavy version, something like 15% of those users don't see an immediate impact on their elbow pain. But what we found for this is, because we've actually, my partner and I put our Calendlies out there. So if anyone's not getting what they want out of the device or what they kind of signed up for, we're here to talk to them about it, to see if we can kind of coach them through different protocol changes or really understand, because we're not here to sell a product. We're here to kind of solve the problem. So if we're not solving the problem, we need to know. But what's come up out of these diagnostic calls is if you treat between the shoulder blade and the spine, kind of the ganglia area there, what we're seeing is basically the elbow a lot of times is referred pain from the shoulder. And so when people start treating upstream,
extremity pain at a spinal source.
Yes,
it's probably from their neck in the first place anyways.
That's exactly it. Yeah, we're going to have so much fun when I can actually make it out there to see you, that this is going to be, I think we've got a lot to talk about around this.
100%, dude. Whenever you're in Scottsdale, let's chat.
Yeah, for sure.
So quick ones here. So any book or resource recommendation for the listeners that it doesn't even just have to be red light, anything that as a CEO of a company, as a high performer, which I would consider you a pretty high performer, is there anything you've read or thought of recently that people need to know about?
Actually, one of the best books that I would say that helps me from a kind of training and general work standpoint, just a generally good way to approach things is, I think it's called the 80-20 something.
Yeah.
I'll have to link it back through.
80-20 rule. Yeah.
80-20 rule. And it's essentially the Pareto principle of where to spend your time and how to spend your time when that thing's going to move the needle for you the best. And it's really powerful thinking. And for me, it's been a kind of game changer as to how I approach things.
Fuck yeah. I love it, dude. One question I ask everybody is, so everybody's got a superpower, and it's not cocky to say you got a superpower. Like I know mine is I'm very good at communicating people. I can take a doctor term and put it down in the most relatable form possible. It's one of my superpowers.
That's awesome.
What's your superpower?
I think my superpower would be just synthesizing things that are really disparate. And so that might be something as far out of the picture as, how lasers are built, and then what's coming from a laser kind of hardware standpoint with physiological kind of interactions of how photons interact with your tissue. And so, this has worked out really well with our tech team here because it's, somehow you just magnetically draw in people who like to go do those same type of synthesis programs. But I would say that, synthesizing really kind of disparate types of information into something that we can take action on is is, I would say is my superpower.
Heck yeah, that's a damn good superpower,
Oh.
especially for a CEO. Do you have any guests that you would recommend for us? Is there anybody you think I need to talk to as far as the recovery standpoint or as far as a red light standpoint?
So if you can, and I can make an introduction to you if you're interested.
Sure.
Evan Picon from Innox or Nox, Nnoxx is his company.
Okay.
Just a really cool, creative thinker, smart guy and fun guy who's also focused on training and performance and cool technology. And so I would say if you can, if you don't mind, I'll connect you with him and see.
Dude, connect me. I'd love to. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, you'll like him.
Yeah.
He's a deep thinker in a lot of ways and puts out really cool. He's got a Substack that he publishes that I kind of I keep up with, and it's my kind of eye candy as those come out, because his approaches to kind of the paradigm change in how we approach bioenergetic systems is really powerful, and just super fun guy to talk to as well. Really smart, really interesting.
I love it, man.
Yeah.
And then for everybody at home, how do they get in touch with you or your team if they want to, whether it's buy a Move Plus or buy one of the things we talked about, or just learn more about red light in general?
Yeah, reach out to us at Kineon_labs on Instagram. So KINEON_LABS, or just reach out to me directly, Forrest with 2 R's at Kineon.io. And that's we try to stay in as close a contact as we can with our community. So we really spend a lot of time interacting with people and want to know how this is either working or not working. We really kind of actively recruit critical feedback, because we feel like this is the only way that you can make a world-class product and a world-class team and provide world-class results for people.
Well, dude, that's how you get better. You got to make sure if you're doing something wrong, you got to know if you're doing something right. It's always good to hear it.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And stay positive either way.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. So for all the listeners at home, this is Building a Fighter. If you guys got to get in touch with us, all of our information, both Forrest and my information, is going to be in the show notes. We have our strength conditioning programs available at buildingfighter.com. We have our courses coming out starting in 2025. So be on the lookout for that, as well as our ebook that should launch by the end of the year, which is going to be a fantastic resource for strength and conditioning in all things combat sports. So all those are available at buildingafighter.com. And as always, thanks for listening. Talk to you next time.